Hello everybody, welcome to the next fly tying tutorial. This session is going to be devoted to basically deer hair and how to handle it. A couple of our guys have wanted to know how to stop it ending up on the floor, and I'm going to be tying sort of fairly basic pattern. Can be quite challenging, but it's the use of the deer hair really that we're concentrating on. So the G&H Sedge, which is the pattern I'm going to use, originally designed obviously years ago by I think it was designed by John Goddard, and then it was tied by Clifford Henry, and they came together to sort of develop this fly for fishing. It's a dry and can be either skated across the top or left static in the surface film, being deer hair, very buoyant, but when there's a bit of a wave about and the fish are high in the surface chasing the naturals as they hatch off, then it can be quite exciting, bow waving behind your fly. But yes, so going to be using a B405 pattern here. The B170 is just a little bit too thin in wire for the resident rainbows and browns possibly, that tend to straighten out the hooks. So there obviously are lots of different hooks on the market, but it wants to be a medium wire as opposed to a fine wire, because so when the trout hit this, they hit it hard. So, and I'm going to be using this UTC Ultra thread in olive, because this is going to have an olivey insect green underbody. So there are a few ways of tying this underbody. You can use these dubbing brushes, which you would obviously need to tie in at the back of the hook before you put the deer hair on, and then trim afterwards. You can use micro straggle, micro chenille, all sorts of things you can use. I'm going to be doing a dubbing loop, so it's a technique that people perhaps aren't familiar with, so I'm just going to attempt to do it. So again, the original pattern said this loop would be tied in at the back of the hook, and then the dubbing spun up at the end. There is the problem of trying to get the material right up to the very top where it meets the hook shank. So doing it this way, tying it in first and parking it, as long as you don't trim it off, which is the favourite once you trim the deer hair, then I think this is a slightly better way of doing it. So I've just got some sort of a drab insect green blend here, and don't need a huge amount, so just placing that in the loop, putting in the spinner, and then just making sure it's more or less in the middle. Now you don't have to take it right up, because we're going to tie that through, and then holding the thread, the loop of thread, sort of halfway up, I've got my spinner here, and then I'm going to spin it. I don't think it's going to be in shot. I'm going to spin it and then just keep hold of it until you feel the thread tighten between your fingers. You can feel that now, so you just let go and pull at the same time, and you get that little rope. want to do a bit more, you hold the same again, spin it up, and then spin it. Just tightens everything up. And then I'm just going to take the longer strands off. This can be trimmed fully when you've tied it in. So I'm going to tie that in so that it ends up at the back of the fly underneath, just as you're going around the bend. Okay, and then I'm going to park that at the back of my vise. So now we're ready for the first batch of seal's fur, and that's the seal's fur I'm using. Seal's fur, deer skin that I'm using. It's a fairly short one. We don't want to be cutting off the, if they're very long, then we want to be using the top between 20 and 30 mil. So we need to take a pinch, and it needs to be about 3 to 4 mil in diameter. So once you've cut it off, hold it by the tips and then just take out the under fur and place it on top, more or less in the middle, and take 1, 2 turns and then pull, and it starts to spin, and then just cut a couple of turns through, and then using the end of a dubbing needle, which has got a hole in the end, a biro, small diameter biro, equally as good, just so you can push that in and holding it so you don't push it around the bend of the hook, so you can just push it up, and then once it's still in place, take a couple of turns in front, so hopefully splaying it back. And then you do the same again. Small bunch. Don't worry too much about keeping the tips in line. Offer it up. Couple of turns round and then let go and then pull and then wind through, 2 or 3 turns through. Compact it, and then basically those 2 turns over the dubbing needle have just helped to keep the material upright and making it easier to tie the next bunch on. So as I'm going down the shank, I'm going to just slightly shorten these lengths of deer hair, just so I haven't got too many really coarse deer hairs when I'm trimming. So snug it up. A couple of turns through. Now, one of the things that when you're handling the deer hair, you do need to keep a reasonable amount of tension on the thread, and I found that the uni 8/0 is just really not strong enough for this operation. You do need to put a bit of pressure on as you're splaying it. And then compact that, and then a couple of turns around. You can see that the deer hair is moving all the time. That's why you need to have a fair amount of pressure on there. Not too much pressure, especially some of these very thin ultra strong threads. They can actually cut through your deer hair. Now I've got a bigger bunch there. Don't be tempted to tie that in, because it will splay all over the place if you're not careful. Having a lot more control on it if the bunch is smaller rather than longer. So again, 1, 2, let go and pull. A few years ago, when I was first learning how to handle deer hair, I looked at advice, and of course we didn't have the benefits of YouTube in those days. One of the things they said about spinning deer hair for muddler heads especially was to not have any silk on the hook shank, because that aided the spinning of it. But I think we found that it is, certainly with synthetic threads, which tend to be a little more slippy, if you had silk that was heavily waxed, then yes, it doesn't want to migrate around the hook particularly easily. But with all of these techniques, it is just about practice, and you will have some horrors, but in the end the trout, I don't think, are that discerning, as long as the approximate shape is there. Now we want to leave ourselves about 3, perhaps 4 mil at the eye, just so that we can tie everything off, tie the body in from underneath, and then put on the hackles. So when you get to that stage, we will then just whip finish and remove the thread, because it's so much easier to remove the thread, and sometimes it's a lot easier to trim this by taking it off. So, but I will leave it on for the video. So I'm just going to make sure that I go underneath and just avoid where the dubbing loop is. I just want to get that fairly close to the shank. And then just going to be coming down either side, just roughly to start with. Just get the approximate shape, and then we can go ahead and trim it up afterwards. So the back of the hook, just going to take an angle slightly from the back of the bend, and then snipping the top. I'm looking for about, I don't know, 25 degrees, 30 degrees. Some of them you see are quite big. So now we're just going to go around and trim. Some people that use deer hair a lot actually trim with scalpels and razor blades, but you can do it with scissors. It's just that it's a little more time consuming, but just make sure you don't snip that loop of thread which is there. Just making sure it's really out of the way. I should be using, just realised I've got a pair of deer hair scissors here, which I don't know if you can see on that edge of the blade. It's just slightly serrated and just makes for slightly easier trimming of the deer hair. So when you've satisfied with the shape, we need to reattach the thread. Get that right up against the body here. Let's go back to those now. And then with the dubbing loop, just pull it through right underneath the shank and then tie it off snugly up against the end of the deer here. And then get that out of the way and trim that off. And then pull everything back, bind everything down. If you want at this stage, you can just trim the dubbing, body dubbing. And basically now we're just going to tie in two smallish hackles. I'm using sort of a ginger game hackle will be fine. And you can see they're quite short. I'm going to remove at least half of that, because this is going to have hackle stalks as antennae. And tie that in on either side. And turn that right up against the body position, and then just bring the thread through, and we'll put a couple of locking wraps underneath, and then using the hackle pliers, I'm just going to wind those forward. So we should get 3 turns, if not more, on the first one. A couple of turns to lock that off. Remove the waste, and then second hackle, wind it through the first one. Three turns on that one. Lock it in place and take a couple of turns weaving the thread to make sure that those are fully locked off. Turn it out of the way, and then just literally pull everything back so we can get all of those hackle fibres forward, back rather. And then a little bit of varnish on the thread. And finally, finish. And retractable bobbins, just so you can make sure you keep your hand on the spool, because it'll take all the spring tension off. So just clear it up and then trim those antennae about the length of the body. And sometimes it's worth keeping the hackle full. If you want it to sit a bit lower in the water, just trim underneath. But you can see you've got the dubbed body underneath. The coloration can go from grey to bright insect green, depending on what species of sedge. But so we have quite a few varieties, but there's not a lot of difference in the actual profile of them. But yeah, can be quite exciting at the right time. Say John Goddard says fish it in a flat calm and hardly move it, just an occasional tweak, especially when the insects, especially when it is a flat calm, they're going to struggle to pull themselves through the surface film. So just the odd little tweak. But then in a wave, yeah, just pull it through, and having the full hackle helps to give a little bit of commotion when it's pulling through. An omission on a couple of my previous ones was, Mr. Gaiman pointed out, was not actually putting the silicone floatant on. The deer hair is inherently buoyant anyway, but just give it a little bit of assistance. Right. Now, I have to say, if you want to avoid using the dubbing loop, which is possibly a little more challenging, as I say, you can use micro chenille, micro straggle. You can even twist up the straggle, taking a length and spinning it in with a pair of hackle pliers, twisting it together so it becomes slightly more bulbous to create the body. Or you could even use a marker pen. These Electroset coloured markers, but you would need to put a little bit of varnish on the deer hair first. But yeah, it's quite an exciting pattern to fish with when the fish are up on the sedge. Okay, enjoy and see you next time.